Henry prepared to divorce his schoolmate when he got into a car accident and fell into a coma. His soul remained trapped by my side, but I pretended not to see him. The doctor said he might never wake up. His schoolmate quickly distanced herself, announcing a new relationship with someone else. When Henry finally woke up, she rushed back and tearfully said, "Henry, I've been waiting for you for so long, you finally woke up." Seeing Henry in the ICU with tubes all over, unconscious, a sense of bittersweet satisfaction rose in my heart. You see, this is the punishment for deceiving someone who truly cared. The doctor said his brain injury was severe, with less than a 5% chance of waking up. When Melody heard the news, she came to the hospital, glanced disdainfully, and coldly said, "I hope you recover soon." She never visited again. She probably forgot that Henry had the accident while buying pizza for her. 6 months ago, on the day before Henry was going to divorce me, he went out in a storm to buy a pizza near the school as Melody had expressed her desire instead of staying safe indoors. He risked it all to fulfill her wish and ended up in a series of accidents, holding a fresh pizza. When I arrived at the hospital, faced with one thin death notification after another, no one could understand the mix of emotions inside me, hoping he would die and feeling a cruel satisfaction at the same time. I didn't know what outcome I wanted. I just hoped he would experience all the pain I went through. Now, he lay in the hospital, a vegetable. And his beloved Melody didn't want him anymore. I once met Melody at a restaurant and kindly suggested that if she spent more time with him, maybe he had a higher chance of waking up. She just smiled and said, "What's that got to do with me? Why should I waste my time on a vegetable? Jenny, you're his wife, you should be the one to take care of him." When she forced Henry to leave me with a high fever and spend her birthday with her, she said it had nothing to do with her. When she needed him to demand a divorce and be with her, she said it was nothing to do with her. But when Henry became a vegetable because of her, suddenly, it had nothing to do with her. Calmly, I said to her, "Melody, don't forget, he got into this accident while trying to buy you that pizza." She got defensive and exclaimed, "Did I force him at knife point to buy it? He willingly wanted to help me, and he got into the accident. Don't blame me." I fell silent, watching her hurriedly leave. Of course, she wouldn't want to wait for someone who might never wake up. I glanced at the soul that had been with me for so long. His eyes showed disbelief and a furrowed brow. He must be feeling terrible now. Henry didn't know I could see him. It was in the second week after the accident when I accidentally fell asleep in my study and woke up to find him there. I called the hospital and was told, "Henry is stable today, no change but no signs of waking up." After hanging up the phone calmly, I realized his whole body was slightly translucent. I walked up to him, ignoring the translucency, and grabbed a book from the shelf. As my emotions went from shock to surprise to calm, I realized Henry's soul was trapped by me. I could even hear him speak. When I picked up the divorce papers he had prepared, I heard him scoff, "Jenny, you must be thrilled now, right? I'm in a coma, unable to divorce you. Your wish has come true." He thought I was reluctant to let him go until he agreed to divorce, but in reality, I had already decided to move on. Happy? Unhappy? I wanted him to be unhappy, too. So, I made sure he overheard how Melody distanced herself from him. In the quiet ICU, I walked over to him. Even in a hospital gown, disheveled and pale, Henry still looked handsome. Despite being in a coma, he still exuded charm. But I liked Henry not for his looks. I understood that the most beautiful things are often the most dangerous. When we first met as best man and maid of honor at a wedding, I immediately categorized him as a dangerous charm. And as I now stood beside him, I couldn't deny there was still something about him that drew me in. From the moment Henry invited me to dinner to express his gratitude, we started to meet more frequently. Whenever it rained, Henry happened to be passing by the internship building and would give me a ride home. During a holiday event that my friend dragged me to, it turned out to be Henry's birthday party. As he made a wish in front of the lit candles, he wished for Jenny's safety. With all the coincidences happening, I began to feel something was off. So, I started to avoid him intentionally. But instead of being concerned about my distance, Henry continued to pursue me, and it wasn't until I nervously asked him what he wanted when he cornered me that he smiled and gently asked, "Jenny, can't you feel it? I'm pursuing you." I didn't understand why Henry liked me. But after that moment, he stopped hiding his feelings and directly launched a strong offensive towards me. I resisted his advances and tried to guard my heart. But at that time, Henry, with his mature, charming, successful demeanor, was so affectionate and gentle towards me, it was almost impossible for me not to be moved. The turning point came on Valentine's Day night when, after drinking a lot to secure a contract, the other person still flirted with me. He casually rested a glass on my chest and said, "It's great to be young, Jenny, do you have a boyfriend?" Before I could react, Henry burst into the room, grabbed the man's wrist, broke the glass, and sternly stated, "She does now." As Henry led me out onto the street, I finally realized what he had just said. After a moment of contemplation, I asked him, "Inside? Will someone take care of it? No need to worry." Nodding, I could guess that a colleague had noticed Henry's true identity, been bribed, and leaked information to him. In the romantic flickering lights of the night, Henry took off his coat and put it around me, not mentioning the unpleasant incident. Encountering such situations in the workplace is common, where you have to endure silently when you can't resist. I had grown accustomed to such injustices and would often cry it out alone later. But Henry stood before me in an absolutely dominant manner, making me feel protected for the first time. When feeling vulnerable, receiving comfort is what matters the most. Amidst passing couples on the roadside, my silence was broken when Henry, in a casual tone, asked me if I wanted to have dinner together, almost as if he was asking if I'd like to celebrate Valentine's Day together. He asked me, "Jenny, want to spend Valentine's Day together?" Even now, I can remember the tremor that emerged within me at that moment. Looking into his sincere eyes, I made up my mind and said, "It's you." Pointing to a roadside rose vendor, I asked, "Can I have a rose?" He hesitated for a second, then suddenly smiled, bought all the roses from the vendor, and told me when he returned, "Now, they're all yours. And there will always be more from now on." At that time, I was too naive, thinking that this would be forever, until Melody returned to the country, and I realized that forever had an expiration date, before she appeared. After Melody came into the picture, all promises and vows became a mockery. I had read countless responses online about the strength of first love, but all those descriptions paled in comparison to the way Henry looked at Melody. It's a cliché story. Melody was Henry's unattainable first love. After she chose to be with another man and went abroad, Henry never forgot her. I was just a passerby in his life. Henry only had one relative, his grandmother. Her only concern was Henry, hoping he would settle down. I was the tool chosen by Henry to make her feel at ease. However, his grandmother genuinely liked me and treated me well. The love I felt from Henry was artificial, while the affection his grandmother showed me felt real. She would make my favorite sweets, prepare clothes for all seasons, and during disagreements between Henry and me, she would unreasonably take my side, scolding Henry with her cane. What could Jenny possibly have done wrong? All the mistakes are all your fault, you little scoundrel. Even before she passed away, she told me, by marrying him, you're the one suffering, Jenny. As long as you two are happy, I will be at peace. Henry held my hand tightly, promising, we definitely will. And then, at a gathering 8 months after his grandmother's passing, he reunited with Melody, who had returned after their breakup. I realized something was wrong due to a very small incident. While dining together one evening, I mentioned the sudden rain followed by a double rainbow, symbolizing good fortune. I asked if he had seen it. He didn't respond because he was distracted. After noticing that I stopped eating and was quietly watching him, he gently smiled and asked, "Jenny, what did you just say?" "It's not important," I replied. During my student days, I could intuitively guess correct answers to difficult multiple-choice questions. I never imagined that this skill, once a point of pride for me, would one day be used on Henry. Almost uncontrollably, I guessed that the seconds Henry was distracted were because of another woman. And my guess was right, it was Melody. She was a schoolmate and a competitor who outclassed Henry when he was less successful. Just with her looks, she easily overshadowed others who liked her and were wealthier than Henry. Therefore, without a doubt, he lost. But he probably never imagined that one day Melody would break up and return when he was already successful. Everything seemed just right, as if their separation in the past was destined for a better reunion later. I didn't know the extent of Henry's love for Melody, to make her decisively call him away from me repeatedly, regardless of his married status. A simple desire expressed by her was enough to ruin my marriage and my life. From initial suspicion to later questioning, and finally pleading in desperation, Henry pushed me away disgustedly, saying, "Jenny, you're really disgusting right now." That night, I stood on the balcony all night, my tears dried by the wind over and over again, trying to figure out one thing. Henry was right, I found myself quite disgusting too. So, I gave up. When Henry brought up divorce again, I asked him, "In these 4 years together, was there ever a moment when you were sincere?" He impatiently avoided my gaze and said no. I lowered my head in silence for a few seconds and calmly agreed to the divorce. He seemed somewhat surprised and cautiously asked, "What trick do you have this time?" Before, several times I used sudden illnesses and car breakdowns as excuses to constantly delay the deadline. The only time I genuinely wanted a divorce from him, he ended up in a coma after a car accident involving Melody, who not only dumped him decisively but also got back together with her ex. I heard that the reason Melody broke up and returned to her country was that her boyfriend and her first love were ambiguous, resulting in frequent arguments and a breakup. The flaw of a man lies in always yearning for what he can't have and regretting what he has lost. So when Melody contacted Henry after returning home and kept appearing in the same places, gradually getting closer to him, her ex-boyfriend also came back to find her. It's hard to say whether Melody was intentionally trying to provoke her ex while being with Henry. After all, Henry used to be his biggest competitor. During the time Henry was considering divorcing me for Melody, it was also when the trust fund kid went crazy trying to win back what he had lost. He did many romantic and extreme things, like apologizing with a drone, sending a ring in a sea of flowers, or self-harming after drinking. Melody watched quietly and continued to be with Henry. Soon after Henry went into a coma from the car accident, her ex-boyfriend once again splurged on a big-screen apology and confession, to which she agreed to reconcile. No one knew what role Henry played between them, but the trust fund kid did visit Henry in the hospital once and was relieved to say, "Even though I shouldn't think this way, I'm grateful for that car accident that night, Henry, I've won again this time." Henry, at that moment, stood behind him with a dark look on his face, unable to do anything due to his ghostly state. From the moment Melody distanced herself to witnessing her reconciliation with her ex, Henry was initially in disbelief, then became furious, and finally had to accept everything begrudgingly. I calmly and happily watched every bit of his pain, observing him quietly following behind me, feeling quite ironic. He wanted so much to cut ties with me, never see me again, but ended up forced to be with me every day. Just like when we were first dating, we shared everything we did every day without reservation, letting each other know our whereabouts. Now, he has to go to work, attend gatherings, go shopping, and plan trips with me every day. Over time, I began to hear his resentful voice, "I'm in a coma, and you still have the mood to go on vacation? Do you even care about my life? Jenny, did I lay down for too long that you forgot you're already married? Stay away from that man." The man he mentioned was an intern I brought in named Richard. Among all the interns I brought in, he was the most outstanding one in terms of ability. I didn't really care how they addressed me, and Richard's deep, clear voice when calling my name didn't offend me in any way. But Henry felt differently. Whenever Richard was around me, he would show a side of him I had never seen before, yelling in desperation, "Jenny, are you blind? Can't you see he has ulterior motives?" When I heard that, I would look up and see Richard, clean and polite, buttoning his shirt neatly, feeling puzzled. "Henry, what's the rush?" Of course, I was no longer a naive girl, nor blind, and it was impossible not to see what Richard was thinking. He liked me. Richard had the look of a popular sunshine boy that girls are into these days, but his personality was calm, restrained, rational, and sensible, a complete contrast. Since I've known him, I've hardly seen him lose control of his emotions. Even when a colleague accidentally deleted the data he worked so hard to create, he would calmly finish his breakfast, then quickly restore it or redo it. After solving the problem, he would calmly tell the concerned colleague, "It's okay now, just be careful next time." The only time I saw a hint of panic on his face was when we went to discuss a project together, and after he left, I went to find him. Along the way, a drunken man dragged me into another room and tried to assault me. Honestly, if this had happened right after graduating, would have been scared stiff and then struggled and screamed for help. I am not that person anymore, so I sized up the situation, and when he approached me, I grabbed a nearby bottle and smashed it on his head. Then I called the manager, the police, checked the surveillance. When Richard found me, his clean and neat shirt had been smeared with dust, and he hadn't noticed. He just looked at my hand bleeding from the cuts, apologized breathlessly. "I'm sorry, I'm late." I gave him a slight smile. "Not late, just in time." Later, he bought medicine to bandage my wounds and drove me home. On the way back, I casually said, looking out the window, "Richard, I'm already married." He showed no surprise and casually replied, "I know, but I heard that you're getting a divorce." These two sentences were the only time we touched on personal matters since we met, and everything said was factual, with no overstepping. So Henry's anger left me puzzled. I didn't do anything, and he clearly did not love me, so why was he getting mad? But that didn't matter, because any of his emotions, including the person he was, would no longer affect me. I continued to maintain a normal working relationship with Richard. However, during today's company outing to climb mountains, I accidentally slipped on the steps and Richard reacted quickly, catching me and rolling down together to protect me. I was fine, just a slight scratch on my cheek. Richard, on the other hand, had bruises on his arms and legs from the impact. We went to the hospital together in an ambulance. I finally heard the results of his examination and the doctor said he was fine, just needed to rest at home. It was then I received a call from Henry's attending physician. It was at that moment that I realized Henry, who had been anxiously calling out for Jenny behind me as I rolled down with Richard, was nowhere to be seen. At the same time, I received a call from the doctor on the phone. They had just examined Henry and saw signs of improvement in his condition. I held the phone, stunned for a moment, then went to the ICU. Standing in front of Henry, who was still asleep with his eyes closed, I smirked mockingly. Can he really wake up with less than a 5% chance? I don't know if Henry will wake up, but half a month after I left the hospital that day, I heard another piece of news. Melody had broken up again. I once read a saying long ago, cheating only has 0 times and countless times, so it wasn't surprising when her boyfriend reconciled with her, only to get involved with an unknown internet celebrity and decide to break up again. What truly surprised me was the way Melody, who used to leave gracefully and with an air of a cold goddess, now behaved in the huge shopping mall, cursing loudly and begging humbly without caring about her image. I watched from afar, feeling a sense of familiarity. That used to be me. The me who held on to Henry tightly and refused to let go, behaving like a crazy person. One of the most memorable times was on my birthday when I saw him chatting happily with Melody at a cafe, saying he had to go on a business trip. At that moment, I felt like I was drenched in ice water from head to toe, with my heart burning like it was on fire. I rushed over and swept everything off the table in front of them. Henry immediately stood up and angrily questioned me, "Jenny, are you crazy?" Melody elegantly smiled and looked at Henry. "How could you marry a woman like her, Henry?" Totally losing my composure, I slapped her and accused her of being a homewrecker. Then Henry, without hesitation, slapped me back. The metallic taste lingered between my lips. That night, he finally brought up the topic of divorce. I truly loved Henry once, so even though my mind told me to let go, emotionally, I couldn't accept it. I couldn't bear it and didn't want them to be happy, so I ended up hurting myself. And now Melody, she tasted the pain I once felt. As for her leaving abruptly last time and acting totally opposite this time, I had to wonder if it was because of her lack of options, her confidence, and the tools she used to torment her ex-boyfriend, Henry, who was in a coma and wouldn't wake up. The drama continued. As I stirred my coffee intending to look away, I caught a glimpse of Henry's almost transparent figure in the corner, calmly watching the chaotic scene. It had been many days since his spirit appeared. But this time, he wasn't trapped by my side anymore, yet he couldn't get close to me either. 3 meters apart, that was the closest he could get to me. I thought that after gaining his freedom, he wouldn't follow me anymore. But every morning when I left for work, I could see him standing quietly under a ginkgo tree near the gate of the community. When he saw me, he would subconsciously walk towards me, only to be pulled back as if by a great force. Every time he tried to come to me, he was dragged back. I didn't know if wandering like a lonely ghost in this world also meant hoping for someone to see him. But one evening as I came out of a dessert shop, I glanced in his direction with a smile. After a moment of surprise, he seemed to move his lips excitedly, probably calling for Henry. Then I walked towards him with an exquisitely wrapped small cake in my hands, watching him step back step by step until I stopped in front of him. He saw Richard walking towards me through his body. Since the accident, Richard had been recovering at home. I had visited him once with flowers and fruits, covered all medical expenses, and hired a caregiver. He didn't refuse, but when I asked if there was anything else he needed, he looked into my eyes and said, "1 month from now, it's my birthday." Now that he had recovered and it happened to be his birthday, I fulfilled my promise by bringing a cake to celebrate with him. As Richard led me towards the parking lot, Henry probably figured out what we were going to do. Amid the bustling crowd, he shouted at me desperately, "Jenny, you're not allowed to go. Come back, Jenny, come back." Without hesitation, I got into the car, watching Henry's anguished face in the rearview mirror, feeling a sense of déjà vu, recalling a small incident. Not long after we got together, I moved to another company one night when I needed to work late. I told him not to pick me up. After work, a colleague offered to drop me off. Just as I got into the car, Henry called. Over the phone, his voice carried a hint of a smile, helpless yet indulgent. "Jenny, I've been waiting for you downstairs for 3 hours. Are you just going to leave me behind like this?" In disbelief, I saw Henry's figure in the rearview mirror, so I got off the car and ran to him, throwing myself into his arms, asking him, "Why didn't you call me? Waiting here all alone." He affectionately ruffled my hair and said with a smile, "I didn't want to disturb my dear girlfriend at work." My thoughts turned, and Henry's ethereal figure in the rearview mirror grew smaller and smaller until it became a tiny dot. Richard asked me, "What are you looking at?" I jokingly replied, "I'm watching a joke." 15 minutes later, we arrived at the reserved restaurant. Though it was his birthday, Richard ordered food according to my taste. I casually shifted my gaze to the cake, opened the packaging, and a sweet orange scent filled the air. After lighting the candles, I held up the cake and cheerfully congratulated him, "Happy birthday, Richard, make a wish." In the soft and dim light of the restaurant, with the flickering flames between us, his face was a bit obscure, but I knew he was earnestly looking at me. He closed his eyes to make a wish, "I hope I won't be late again." I couldn't help but laugh, put down the cake, and raised my glass to toast him, "Then I wish your wish comes true." As the night wore on and we got a bit tipsy, we strolled along the riverbank, the river reflecting the bright lights, and after a while, I sighed and talked to Richard about personal matters for the second time. I told him frankly, "Richard, although I'm getting a divorce, as you know, my husband is in a coma after a car accident." The night breeze gently swayed his hair across his forehead. Unaffected by the implications of my words, he casually leaned his arm on the railing by the shore, turned his head to look at me, and bluntly said, "Divorce or widowhood, there will always be an outcome." Just as he finished that sentence, I was surprised to see Henry's figure not far away. I didn't know if the evening wind carried those words to his ears, but as my gaze fell upon him, I saw him silently watching me. Then he chuckled in a somewhat self-deprecating way before his figure slowly dissipated in the wind. 3 days later, I got the outcome. Henry woke up. Melody was the first to rush to the hospital before me. In the quiet and cold hospital room, she tearfully looked at Henry's calm gaze and said, "I've been waiting for you for so long, Henry, you've finally woken up." I didn't know how she got to know that Henry had woken up, and I wasn't interested in her tearful complaints of sincere love. My eyes swept across Henry's eyes that had always looked at me since I appeared, and I turned to the doctor standing by the side, asking, "When can he be discharged?" The doctor cautiously explained, "Mr. Henry just woke up and needs to stay in the hospital for observation and rehabilitation training for a while. If there's anything urgent?" I politely smiled and said, "Nothing urgent, just about getting a divorce." Just as I finished speaking, I heard a sound. Henry snatched the cup of water from Melody's hand, his eyes red with anger, staring at me intensely, almost panting. "Jenny, I just woke up, and you can't even wait to talk about divorce with me?" You see, men are best at distorting facts and twisting the truth. Clearly he did everything to force me into a divorce, and now he blames me for wanting a divorce. Before I could speak, I heard Melody's very soft voice, tinged with confusion, calling out, "Henry?" The hospital room fell silent for a moment. I calmly glanced at the shattered glass on the floor, ignored Henry's furious gaze, and decisively turned and left, leaving behind only one sentence: "Let me know when it's time to divorce." Upon discharge after that, I never visited the hospital again, but I heard that Melody went to the hospital every day. I didn't know what she did there, nor did I care. Unfortunately, every 2 or 3 days, would receive a call from the hospital, informing me about Henry's recovery. I'm not sure if it was necessary to report these to a family member, but I didn't want to know. So, the next time they called, I politely declined. "He's an adult and doesn't need to update me on everything. Unless he's dead, don't call me again." Just before hanging up, I heard the sound of glass shattering on the other end and Melody's exclamation. I saw Henry again 2 months later, the night he was discharged. Since my car was at the car wash, Richard, who was working late with me, dropped me off at the entrance of the neighborhood. Just as I watched his car drive away, I heard an angry voice behind me, "Jenny." The smile on my lips froze as I turned to look. It was Henry. His face was a bit pale, he had lost a lot of weight, and the thin shirt billowed in the night breeze, casting a long shadow under the streetlight. I stood still, unmoved, watching him stride towards me. Then he coldly asked, "Where are you coming from at this late hour?" I couldn't be bothered to deal with him, furrowed my brows and turned to the side, saying, "If it wasn't for the divorce, I don't think we have anything to talk about." Just as I took a couple of steps, he blocked me. Veins were popping on his forehead, and through gritted teeth, he said to me, "Jenny, don't forget, we haven't divorced yet." I almost immediately understood what he meant, feeling the irony to the extreme. I couldn't help but laugh lightly, raising my head to ask him gently, "Henry, that marriage certificate couldn't restrain you in the past. Do you think it can restrain me now?" Melody approached me a month after Henry was discharged. Since Henry woke up from his coma, his attitude towards Melody had completely changed, so much so that even the nurses in the hospital could sense Henry's coldness towards Melody. After being discharged, Henry used poor excuses about needing to work to avoid meeting her, and then he began appearing at my company building daily, waiting outside my neighborhood. Because he didn't want to divorce. So, when Melody approached me, her first words were, "Jenny, are you doing this on purpose?" Purposefully being ambiguous with a man to provoke Henry, to make him try to win you back. I had just come out of the restaurant, amused by her words, holding a coffee cup in one hand, the other hand pushing back my slightly curled hair behind my shoulders, looking at her with lowered brows, and calmly replied, "Yes, that's right, just as you thought, Jenny." I had no interest in listening to her baseless accusations, so I skirted around her with my high heels and entered the company gates. But when I turned around, I saw her persistently trying to follow, only to be stopped by the security guard. Facing the hesitant inquiry from the security guard, "Jenny, who is she?" I smiled and replied, "Just someone irrelevant." After that, I never saw Melody again. But I heard that after Henry repeatedly ignored her, Melody, fed up, coldly told him, "Henry, you better not regret it. I won't give you another chance." Shortly after, she started seeing the vice president of their company, who had a favorable opinion of her. Obviously, Melody's harsh words had no impact on Henry, as he continued to find various reasons to meet me and insisted, "Jenny, I won't get a divorce." I found it ironic and ridiculous. When he was trying to force me to divorce him, he probably never thought we would switch roles one day, with him being the one saying those words to me. I even heard him softly and gently say to me after a long time, "Jenny, can we start over?" He said start over. He wanted me to pretend like Melody never existed, like he had never hurt me, as if everything never happened, and then get back together with him without any hard feelings, loving him like before. I felt helpless and mostly confused, and in the end, I only gave him one response: "How could I have married someone like you, Henry?" That line must have hit a nerve, as he immediately became embarrassed and angrily retorted, "Then who do you want to marry?" That in turn? He then asked me, Jenny, have you caused enough trouble yet? Yes, he wanted a divorce to pursue true love, and my desire for a divorce was just being unreasonable actually. Since I gave up on him and moved on, I hadn't been angry for a long time. My career was going well, I had friends by my side, and my life was peaceful, seemingly nothing worth getting irritated about. Until this moment, my emotions were stirred up again. Words were not enough to vent my frustration, so I raised my hand without hesitation and slapped him hard. Then there was silence. Henry's face was turned to the side from the slap. He kept that tilted position for a while, then touched his cheek and sarcastically chuckled, There, I've returned the slap you owed me. Are you satisfied? I knew you allowed him to get close, only to get back at me. Jenny, you've achieved your goal. I didn't deny it, I did have some feelings for Richard. The reason was simple. One evening, I was troubled by a tough project for a long time, sitting alone on a bench in the square, lost in thought. There were sounds of laughter and merriment around me, colorful balloons and bubbles drifting by, but none of it concerned me. It was in that scene that a stuffed bear led by a balloon walked through the crowd to me, and tied the balloon to my wrist. Then, it performed a rabbit dance for me. To be honest, the dance wasn't perfect, but it made me smile, and I teasingly remarked, watching him, wearing a stuffed bear costume and dancing like a rabbit, Richard, you're quite something. He took a few steps closer, removed his headpiece, revealing a slightly flushed handsome face, with his temples damp with sweat, but his clear and bright eyes were fixed on my face. He said, It doesn't matter what you wear, or what you dance, what matters is, Jenny, you're smiling. I smiled. So, the reason was just that simple. He made me happy. Later, I squinted and looked at him carefully for a moment, and asked him, Was it also you who appeared in front of me as the stuffed bear last time? It was on the night of our first argument with Henry over Melody. I was sitting by the glass wall in the cafe, feeling glum, when a stuffed bear came towards me, did a magic trick behind the glass. Richard hadn't joined the company yet, and I didn't know who the person under the headpiece was, but I remembered after I wrote, Thank you, with my lipstick on a tissue. He looked at me silently for a few seconds, then turned and walked slowly into the crowd. Shortly after that, I heard his introduction in front of the interns at the company. Hello, I'm Richard. Unlike the previous time, this time during the dance, Richard stood before me without the headpiece, looked at me for a moment, and whispered, Do you remember me? I tugged at the balloon on my wrist and blinked. Of course, I remember you. Compared to the intense emotions Henry brought me, Richard's feelings were like a warm glass of water, not very exciting or overwhelming, just calm and gentle. Besides, I wasn't about to cut off love completely just because of a failed relationship. That would make Henry's short 4 years in my long life seem too important. So, I didn't resist the feelings I had for Richard. After all, love itself wasn't wrong, it's the people who can be wrong. And Henry, he was just a mistake I encountered on my life's journey. Letting him go meant letting go of everything that came after, as they were no longer relevant to him. I had no intention of using a genuine feeling to get back at him. Therefore, in response to Henry's somewhat confident interrogation, I just shook my head lightly and looked at him scornfully. You think too highly of yourself, Henry. His face paled a bit in that moment, and he opened his mouth, his voice trembling slightly and hoarse. Jenny, I know it was all my fault in the past. I hurt you deeply because of my stubbornness, but now I know I was wrong. I've realized that you're the one I truly love. So, I won't get a divorce. Faced with his stubborn appearance, I smiled lightly and replied, If that's the case, Henry, then you should also experience what it's like to have the person you love think of another man day and night. In the end, the knife he stabbed me with was drawn back against himself. Henry said I was the one he truly loved. Honestly, when I heard those words, my heart didn't flutter at all. I even felt like laughing a little. If I had to pay the price of being deeply hurt just to make him realize who he truly loved, then that kind of love would be an insult to me. Moreover, it was all based on Melody deceiving him and leaving him, which led to his regret. After that, Henry continued to pester me for a long time. I didn't deliberately avoid him, nor did I angrily tell him to leave. Late at night, outside the company building, at the entrance of the rainy residential area, he was willing to stand and wait, as he couldn't intervene in my life anymore except by using such low methods as pestering me persistently. even though we were still married. When he approached me again, he asked me, "Jenny, deep down you don't really love me, do you?" I didn't know in what state of mind he said that, so I looked up and carefully studied his expression, then asked him, "Henry, do you remember the summer in our second year of marriage? That evening in summer, filled with the continuous buzzing of cicadas, we were having barbecue at an outdoor restaurant when a group of drunken troublemakers caused a commotion. In the chaos, I shielded Henry from a broken bottle that was thrust towards him. My light gauzy skirt tore instantly, and the blood from the wound on my waist stained Henry's white shirt with a large patch of red. When I woke up in the hospital ward, I saw Henry sitting by my bed, looking disheveled, with red-rimmed eyes, holding my hand and hoarsely saying, "Jenny, please don't do this to yourself. I can't bear to see you hurt." I weakly smiled at him then. "Don't worry, it's not that painful." Indeed, it wasn't too painful, far less than the hurt he caused me later. As we recollected silently, neither of us spoke, and all I could hear was the trembling sound of his breath. Finally, I sighed helplessly, "Henry, 4 years ago, you were unbeatable in my heart." After a long pause, he seemed to struggle to speak, his voice hoarse and dry. "And now? Am I no longer the one in your heart, overshadowed by someone else?" I looked at him earnestly, shaking my head. "No, Henry, you are no longer in my heart. Perhaps it's come to a dead end," and he revealed a touch of bitterness, trying to play the family card. "But Jenny, you promised Grandma that we would stay together." Feeling tired, I remained silent, showed him a photo on my phone. It was a letter from my grandmother. The gist was that if Henry didn't treat me well, I shouldn't hesitate to leave him without turning back. I thought I would never need this letter, but it turned out I used it twice. The first time I didn't listen to the advice in time and went through a long period of torment. The second time was right at this moment. Rain began falling outside the window at some point, the gloomy dusk descended, Henry's temples showed faint blue veins, and in the end, he left without saying a word. His steps were hurried, his figure disheveled. Long ago, I had imagined that if Henry forced me to divorce, I would look at his bright and elegant self with pain and hatred, and say, "Henry, I will never forgive you." Today, when I found myself facing this day, my emotions were strangely calm while processing the divorce. Henry seemed to have aged quite a bit, and I heard he ended up being sent to the hospital with a high fever that wouldn't break after getting caught in a heavy rain. Perhaps the accident had a significant impact on his health. My friend couldn't help but chuckle on the phone as he told me, "He's showing symptoms from the accident now. Who knows how long he'll last. Cheating in a marriage and squandering genuine affection, it's what he deserves." I hired the best divorce lawyer, presented all the evidence of Henry's infidelity, and as the property was being divided, I didn't give up a single penny that rightfully belonged to me. Henry remained silent throughout the process until just before we parted ways. Suddenly, he spoke, almost as if he was asking me or talking to himself, "If Melody hadn't come back then, could we have spent the rest of our lives together? If Melody hadn't returned, perhaps his deceit towards me would never have been revealed, but his unrequited love for his first love would have lingered forever, growing more idealized with time. Eventually, due to the little conflicts between us, he would start reminiscing about Melody. And I would become the object of his resentment in the constant comparisons he made between us." I gazed at the cloudless sky and smiled faintly. "Henry, I never intended to get caught up in this love triangle. It was you, driven by your self-interest, who dragged me into it." Life after divorce didn't change much. I went on with work, socializing, and occasionally took a few days off for a trip after finishing a project. Except for one thing, Richard and I established a romantic relationship. 3 months after my divorce. At a friend's birthday party, I was out on the terrace for some fresh air when a project partner approached me and offered me a drink, politely asking, "I found the original soundtrack CD of that old movie we talked about during our collaboration. Would you be interested, Jenny?" We're all adults, and the implications were clear. I raised an eyebrow, smiled, and was about to respond when I heard a voice behind him. "Sorry, I was here first." It was Richard. Clad in a clean and crisp black and white tracksuit, his jet black hair made his facial features sharp yet nonchalant as he stood there quietly, gazing steadily at me. A scent of unknown flowers wafted in with the night breeze. Breaking the silence, I calmly looked at the drink in the project partner's hand and said straightforwardly, "Sorry, I'll just have water." Declining gracefully, the terrace was soon left with only Richard and I. I stood quietly without moving, watching him take off his track jacket and drape it over my exposed shoulder in a long dress. I then slightly raised my face, smiled leisurely, and asked him, "Richard, what movie are we going to watch?" He looked down at me, his eyes bright and serious, and said, "Let's go see I Love You." Between Richard and me, there weren't any grand, memorable scenes, but recalling our time together always evoked feelings of warmth and happiness. The mornings with warm milk he brought me, carrying my hair tie, keeping a pair of flat shoes in his car, and discreetly adjusting my diet a week before my period. Sometimes, as I watched him earnestly blow dry my hair in the mirror, I would reminisce about the first sign that he was into me. Perhaps it was in the same elevator, him standing behind me, his gaze lingering on me through the mirror. A slightly ambiguous look in his eyes. Richard is emotionally mature, independent, and talented. He seems to give more in our relationship than I do. Sometimes I ask him if he thinks it's unfair, but he just shakes his head and holds me, expressing a sense of unease. "I just feel like you might leave at any time." Due to past betrayals in relationships, I hold back from fully expressing my love, always leaving a way out. "I apologize, I'm sorry if I can't make you feel loved 100%. He smiles in relief and says sincerely, "Then I will love you more to make up for it." I don't know how far Richard and I will go, but as long as we're happy together, I'll take each day as it comes. Whether we stay together or not, as long as I feel comfortable. This is a lesson I learned from my failed relationship with Henry. I saw Henry again in the second year after our divorce. At a welcome dinner for a friend returning from abroad, I was stopped in the hallway by a commotion that blocked the path. As I looked around, I saw Henry at the other end of the crowd, quietly watching me. Ignoring him, I then saw Melody, one of the women in the chaos, who seemed to be screaming like a madwoman. Fate had the three of us cross paths due to infidelity. Now we meet again at a similar event. Melody and her then boyfriend got married shortly after. Unfortunately, he cheated on her in their second year of marriage. At that moment, I didn't know whether to sympathize with her repeated cheating or take pleasure in her comeuppance. I hope she remembers the pain she caused someone else. When the crowd dispersed, Henry and I passed each other. He called my name, then hoarsely said, "I'm sorry." I didn't bother to figure out his expression, which seemed sorrowful, guilty, and filled with uncontrollable grief. I calmly replied, "I won't forgive you, and I hope you don't live well." He didn't fare well. It was said that he suffered from the effects of a car accident, seeking medical treatment abroad with little success. He was deteriorating physically and mentally. As Richard called me from afar, Henry turned quickly and walked away. I couldn't help but notice his slightly hunched and trembling figure. On the way home, too tired to talk, I absent-mindedly scrolled through Richard's phone. He thought I was upset about meeting Henry, hence he apologized, "I'm sorry for being late." Suddenly, I came across an old photo in his album from years ago. The person in it was me. Back in my junior year, I tutored an English high school student who lived with his neglectful mother. For him, I was not just a tutor but also a companion. It was Richard, as revealed in the picture where he secretly captured me eating cake. I had recognized him the first time I saw him at work, but what surprised me was that he not only took that picture but also kept it all these years. Feeling a flutter in my heart, I didn't know what his apology meant, for not coming out sooner to save me or for not finding me before Henry hurt me. But it didn't matter. I held his hand back and smiled at him. "It's not too late, it's just right. The night breeze is cool, the moonlight is gentle, and my love is by my side. Everything is just right."